Her uniform meant nothing here. They called her a hero, but the foreman called her a criminal. A decorated army medic, she defied direct orders to enter a collapsing building, knowing she had mere minutes to save a life. But when the dust settled, she found herself not in a hospital, but in handcuffs. They tried to bury her with regulations, never suspecting her greatest weapon wasn't a medic bag, but a soldier's unbreakable will to expose the truth. This wasn't just a rescue. It was war against a system happy to let a man die, and she was the only one who refused to stand down. Part 1. Procedure and Principle. Sergeant Maya Reyes felt out of place. In the chaotic symphony of downtown traffic and echoing chatter, her stillness was a foreign concept. At 28, she was a decorated Army combat medic, a woman whose world was defined by structure, discipline, and the precise, brutal calculus of life and death. Here, on terminal leave, the civilian world felt loud, messy, and dangerously lax. They saw a quiet, athletic woman in jeans and a simple t-shirt. They didn't see the soldier beneath, the one whose mind was constantly assessing angles, exits, and potential threats, even while waiting for a latte. The man in charge of the chaos was Frank Miller, the construction site's foreman. He was a caricature of authority, a man whose power was derived from a hard hat and a high-visibility vest. He saw the world through the lens of liability and union rules. When he looked at Maya, who had been passing the site when the ground first shuddered, he saw just another civilian bystander, and a woman at that. His tone was dismissive, a blend of forced calm and irritation, as he barked orders to keep people back. For him, her quiet intensity was just feminine panic he needed to manage. The crisis began with a low groan of stressed metal, a sound Maya knew intimately. It was the prelude to failure. A section of the half-finished skyscraper's subterranean parking garage had collapsed during a concrete pour. The air filled with a thick, chalky dust, the shriek of twisting rebar, and then a wave of panicked screams. Car alarms blared from the street, adding to the cacophony. "Everybody back. Stay behind the line," Miller yelled, his crew already unfurling yellow caution tape. "First responders are on their way. Do not enter the area." But Maya's training had already taken over. While others pulled out phones to record, she was scanning. Her eyes cut through the dust, analyzing the debris field not as a terrifying mess, but as a tactical problem. She saw the pancaked layers of concrete, the exposed wires sparking feebly, the cascade of loose gravel. And then she saw it. A movement. It was small, almost imperceptible, a few twitching fingers protruding from beneath a massive, preformed concrete wall that had fallen sideways, pinning someone against a support column. "Sir," Maya said, her voice cutting through Miller's bluster with quiet authority. "There's someone trapped. Right there." She pointed. "They're alive, but they're pinned. We need to get to them now." Miller squinted into the dust cloud, his face tightening with annoyance. "Nobody goes in there. It's unstable. We wait for the fire department. That's the procedure." "Sir, look at the way that rebar is bent," Maya pushed, her medic's mind running a fatal countdown. "It's putting direct pressure on his lower body. That's a crush injury. He'll go into shock and be dead from reperfusion syndrome long before your procedure gets him out. He has minutes, not an hour." Miller turned to her, his face flushing with anger. "And who are you, sweetheart? An engineer? A doctor?" he asked with a sneer. "I'm in charge of this site, and I'm not letting some amateur get herself killed so her family can sue me. Back behind the tape. That's a direct order." In that moment, Miller ceased to be a foreman. He became Captain Volkov in a hard hat. An obstacle. He wasn't assessing the victim. He was assessing his own risk. He was protecting his job, not the person trapped in the rubble. And Maya was at the same crossroads she'd faced a world away. To follow the rules of this place meant participating in a man's death. To do the right thing meant breaking every rule Miller had. She gave him a slow, deliberate nod. "You're right. I'll stay back." Then, as Miller turned to yell at another bystander, Maya moved. It wasn't a panicked run, but a fluid, purposeful motion. She slipped under the tape and entered the wreckage. Her military training dictated every step. She moved in a low crouch, her eyes constantly scanning upwards at the groaning structure above. She tested the stability of debris before putting her full weight on it, moving with a ghost-like silence that contrasted with the surrounding noise. She was a soldier navigating a minefield. She reached the young man. He was conscious, barely, his face pale and beaded with sweat. His name tag, impossibly clean, read Leo Vance. An engineering intern. A steel rod from the slab had pierced his thigh, and the weight of the concrete was crushing his legs. Ignoring Miller's furious shouts from behind the safety line, Maya went to work. Her hands were steady, her focus absolute. She ripped a section of her own t-shirt to pack the wound, then unbuckled her sturdy leather belt. As she began to expertly fashion it into a tourniquet high on his leg, a deep, resonant groan echoed from the ceiling above them. A shower of dust and small pebbles rained down. She was alone, defying the on-site authority, in an active collapse zone, with a critically injured patient. The clock was ticking, both on Leo's life and on the stability of the concrete tomb they were in. The mission was hers, and failure was not an option. "Leo, look at me." Maya's voice was not a request. It was a command, honed by years of cutting through the fog of shock and pain. Leo's eyes, wide with terror, snapped to hers. "My name is Maya. I'm going to get you out of here, but you have to do exactly as I say. Can you do that?" He gave a weak, jerky nod, his breathing a series of ragged hitches. "Good. First, I need you to keep breathing. Slow and steady. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Match my breathing. Look." She took an exaggeratedly calm breath, her shoulders rising and falling in a steady rhythm. It was a classic technique for calming a panicked soldier, and it worked just as well on a terrified intern. Leo's ragged gasps began to even out. Outside the debris field, Frank Miller was apoplectic. "Get out of there, lady. I'm calling the cops. You're trespassing. You're contaminating a scene." His threats were hollow, lost in the vastness of the disaster. He was a man whose authority had evaporated the moment the concrete fell. He was shouting procedures at a reality that had no time for them. Maya ignored him completely. Miller and his rules existed in a different world, a safe world where help was just a phone call away. Here, in the dust and the dark, there was only the mission: save the man in front of her. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument of triage, worked with chilling clarity. Airway clear. Breathing is shallow but unlabored. Circulation compromised by the crush and the femoral bleed. The tourniquet was a stopgap, a desperate deal with the devil. She knew she had, at most, 2 hours before the tissue in his leg began to die. But the immediate threat was the immense weight crushing his pelvis and lower abdomen. "Leo, I need to know what you feel," she said, her hands gently but firmly probing the area around the slab. "Can you feel your toes?" "No, I can't feel anything," he whispered, a tear tracing a clean path through the grime on his cheek. "Am I going to die?" "Not on my watch," Maya said, the words automatic, a creed she had lived by in far worse places than this. "We're going to get this weight off you." She scanned her surroundings. Her eyes, accustomed to finding solutions in barren landscapes, saw not just rubble, but tools. A length of thick, discarded rebar. A shattered concrete block that could serve as a fulcrum. It was a simple physics problem, a question of leverage. It was also a massive gamble. Shifting the slab could cause a further collapse. She made her decision. The groaning of the structure above them was becoming more frequent, the symphony of destruction playing its encore. There was no time to wait for a better option. "Okay, Leo, I'm going to try and lift this a few inches. It's going to hurt," she said, her voice dropping into a low, calm register. "When I lift, I need you to push with your arms and try to slide yourself backward. Even an inch. Can you do that for me?" He nodded, his jaw set with a fresh wave of determination. Maya wedged the concrete block as close to the slab as she could. She slid the long rebar into the gap, positioning it over the makeshift fulcrum. It was a crude lever, but it would have to do. She wrapped her hands around the cold steel, took a deep, centering breath, and put her entire body weight into it. The rebar bowed under the strain. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a scream of tortured metal, the massive concrete slab shifted. It moved less than an inch, but it was enough. "Now, Leo, push," she grunted, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. With a choked sob of effort, Leo pushed against the ground. He moved. It was a tiny, agonizing scrape, but he was moving. The slab settled back down with a sickening thud, but he was partially clear. The direct, Crushing pressure on his pelvis was reduced. He cried out, a sound of both pain and relief. Maya felt a small, grim flicker of victory. But it was short-lived. The movement, small as it was, had consequences. A large crack snaked across the ceiling above them, and with a deafening roar, a fresh section of the damaged garage roof gave way, plunging their small pocket of survival into near total darkness and raining down a new cascade of debris. Of course, here is the third part of the story. Darkness, absolute and suffocating. The air, already thick with dust, was now a choking fog of pulverized concrete. The roar of the collapse was replaced by an unnerving silence, punctuated only by the drip of a broken pipe and Leo's terrified, ragged breathing beside her. Maya, are you there? His voice was a thin thread in the blackness. I'm here, Leo, she answered, her own voice a low, steady anchor. She didn't allow a hint of her own racing pulse to enter her tone. Panic was a contagion, and in a command situation, the leader had to be immune. Status report. Are you hurt anywhere else? I don't think so. I can't see anything. Don't move. Let your eyes adjust. Maya was already doing a mental inventory. No immediate new injuries. Air quality is poor, but breathable for now. The structure is settling, which means it could shift again at any moment. Our primary objective is to establish communication and await extraction. It was textbook. She had run this drill 100 times in pitch-black training facilities designed to simulate collapsed buildings. The only difference was the warm, sticky feeling of Leo's blood on her hand. Her fingers, with the practiced delicacy of a surgeon, found the small tactical flashlight on her keychain. A click, and a thin, powerful beam cut through the gloom. She immediately swept it over the ceiling. It was a nightmare of twisted rebar and fractured concrete, a web of potential death hanging just feet above their heads. She noted the most unstable sections, mapping the new geography of their tomb. Then, she focused the beam on Leo. He was pale but alert. Okay, Leo, I'm going to check the tourniquet. It's going to stay on. The good news is, we're alive. The bad news is, we're going to have to be patient. Outside, the second collapse had transformed the scene. The distant wail of sirens was now an overwhelming roar as fire trucks, ambulances, and police cars converged on the site. A new authority arrived. Battalion Chief Evans, a veteran firefighter with a calm, weathered face and eyes that had seen everything. He took one look at the chaotic scene, at Miller sputtering incoherently, and established command. Get me a structural engineer and the site plans now. Evans boomed, his team already moving with practiced efficiency. Search and rescue teams, stage at the perimeter. We do not go in until we assess the stability. This whole damn thing could come down. It was then that Miller, finally finding a legitimate authority figure to appeal to, pointed a trembling finger toward the wreckage. Chief, there was a woman. She went in there, against my direct orders. There's a man trapped, and she just ran in. She caused this. The second collapse happened right after she went in. Evans's gaze sharpened. A civilian in an active collapse zone was his worst-case scenario. It complicated everything. Did you see where she went? As if on cue, a tiny beam of light flickered from deep within the rubble. It flashed 3 times, paused, then 3 times again, then 3 more. One of the younger firefighters turned to Evans. Chief, look. Evans's eyes narrowed. He knew that signal. It wasn't a random flicker of a dying light. It was deliberate, calculated. 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots. S-O-S, in Morse code. Who the hell is in there? Evans muttered to himself. He keyed his radio. All teams, hold positions. We have a confirmed survivor, possibly 2. And one of them knows what they're doing. Let's move, people. Carefully. The rescue operation shifted. It was no longer a blind search, but a targeted extraction. They had a specific location. But for Maya, the arrival of help was a double-edged sword. She was no longer just a medic. She was an unauthorized civilian who had flagrantly disregarded orders and breached a secure perimeter. She had saved a man's life, but in the rigid, hierarchical world of first responders, she had broken the chain of command. As the sounds of heavy machinery and disciplined shouting grew closer, she knew that her battle for Leo's life was almost over. But her battle with the world of rules and procedures was just beginning. A rescuer's spotlight cut through the darkness, the bright beam forcing Maya to squint. It swept across the rubble before locking onto them, trapping them in a circle of brilliant light. Voices, muffled by the concrete, grew louder, sharpening into crisp, professional commands. I have visual. 2 survivors, conscious. A voice boomed from the outside. Maya shielded Leo's eyes with her hand, protecting him from the sudden glare. They're here, she said, her voice a calm reassurance. Just hang on. They know what they're doing. The rescue was a miracle of slow, methodical engineering. It was the absolute antithesis of Maya's instinctive, desperate act. The team, led by Battalion Chief Evans, worked with a cold, dispassionate precision. They used hydraulic struts to shore up the precarious ceiling, inflatable airbags to gently lift slabs of concrete, and fiber-optic cameras to check for other voids. Every move they made was calculated, every procedure followed to the letter. They were working not just to save a man, but to ensure the safety of the entire operation. Evans himself made his way to them through the narrow crawl space his team had secured. His face, coated in a layer of grime, was unreadable. His eyes took in Maya's makeshift lever, her improvised tourniquet, her calm demeanor. He didn't see a hero, he saw a complication. "I'm Battalion Chief Evans, Fire Department," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Are you injured, ma'am?" "I'm fine," Maya replied. He's not. Crush injury to the pelvis, penetrating trauma to the femoral artery. I placed a tourniquet approximately 20 minutes ago. He's conscious and stable, but he needs a trauma center now. Her clinical, panic-free assessment seemed to catch him off guard for a fraction of a second. He nodded, his gaze lingering on her face for a moment too long. "We'll get him out." As they finally secured Leo to a backboard and began the long, careful process of extracting him back to the daylight, the reality of Maya's situation began to set in. While Leo was her mission, she had a purpose. Now, with him in the hands of the paramedics, she was just a person in the rubble, not a savior, but a trespasser. 2 police officers were waiting for her at the edge of the collapse zone. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one of them said, his tone polite but firm. Frank Miller stood nearby, his face a mask of vindication and anger. "That's her. I told her to stay back. She almost got everyone killed. She should be arrested." Maya was led past the flashing lights and the crowd of news reporters that had already begun to gather. They didn't see a soldier who had saved a life. They saw a woman being escorted away from a disaster scene by the police. The charge was as absurd as it was official: reckless endangerment and obstruction of emergency services. At the police station, she sat in a sterile interview room, her hands now clean, but she could still feel the grit of dust and blood beneath her fingernails. A detective, a weary-looking man named Sandoval, looked over her ID. "Sergeant Maya Reyes. U.S. Army," he read aloud, looking up at her with a new flicker of interest. "Combat medic. 2 tours. Silver Star." He leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the table. "So, Sergeant Reyes, you want to tell me why you decided to ignore a lawful order from a site foreman and enter an unstable collapse zone?" Maya met his gaze directly, her voice even. "Because I made a situational assessment. I determined the casualty had minutes, not hours. The foreman's procedure would have resulted in a fatality. My actions did not." "That's not your call to make," Sandoval countered, though his voice lacked some of its earlier conviction. "There are rules. There's a chain of command." "The chain of command shouldn't cost a man his life," Maya said quietly. "I took command of the situation because the person in charge failed to lead." Sandoval was silent for a long moment, studying her. He had seen hundreds of criminals, victims, and witnesses, but he had never seen this kind of unwavering, almost unnerving calm. He wasn't dealing with a reckless civilian. He was dealing with a soldier who had brought the battlefield home with her, and she was utterly convinced she had done the right thing. The problem was, according to the law, she was entirely in the wrong. The story could have ended there, in a quiet stalemate in a police interview room. A matter of procedure versus a life. But in the hours that followed, the official narrative began to fray at the edges, and a new one, based on facts, started to emerge. It began with Battalion Chief Evans. Back at the now stabilized site, he did what good commanders do. He conducted a thorough after-action review. He watched the security footage from a nearby building. The grainy video was chillingly clear. It showed Maya's fluid, professional movements into the rubble. It showed her assessing the situation, not panicking. Most importantly, it captured the precise moment she applied the lever and the catastrophic secondary collapse that followed moments after she had already moved Leo, proving she hadn't caused it, but had narrowly saved them from it. Evans, a man who had built a career on procedure, recognized something else. Instinct, training, and a level of calculated risk he hadn't seen outside of his own elite rescue squads. Next came the testimony. Several construction workers, who had initially been cowed by Miller's shouting, told investigators that the woman seemed to know exactly what she was doing. But the most powerful voice was Leo Vance's. From his hospital bed, with his family weeping beside him, he was unequivocal. She was calm, he told Detective Sandoval. She told me how to breathe. She told me exactly what she was going to do. She saved my life. The foreman was just yelling about his insurance. The final piece was the 911 call log. The first calls came in at 2:14 p.m. The fire department was dispatched at 2:15 p.m. and arrived at 2:21 p.m. The secondary collapse happened at 2:24 p.m. Maya had pulled Leo from the direct crush point at approximately 2:23 p.m. The timeline was irrefutable. Had she waited, as instructed, Leo Vance would have been crushed to death before the first rescuers even had a chance to assess the scene. By the next morning, the story had exploded in the media, but not the one Frank Miller had hoped for. The headline wasn't "Reckless Woman Causes Collapse." It was "Off-Duty Army Medic Saves Man's Life, Arrested for Obstruction." The narrative had flipped. Maya wasn't a vigilante, she was a hero. The charges were dropped before she even finished her complimentary stale coffee at the precinct. Detective Sandoval entered the room, slid a folder onto the table, and sat down. "You're free to go, Sergeant Reyes," he said, the formal title now laced with respect. "All charges have been dismissed." Maya simply nodded, her expression unchanged. "Chief Evans called me personally," Sandoval continued, leaning forward. He said, and I quote, "Her breach of civilian protocol was a textbook execution of military field medicine under fire. He said you did in 2 minutes what his team would have needed 20 minutes and a dozen pieces of heavy equipment to even attempt. By which time, it would have been a recovery, not a rescue." 2 weeks later, Maya stood on the steps of City Hall. She wore her dress uniform, the sharp creases and polished brass a stark contrast to the jeans and t-shirt she had worn that day. The sun glinted off the silver star pinned to her chest. Beside her stood the mayor, a beaming Leo Vance in a wheelchair, and a humbled-looking Chief Evans. "In a crisis, we rely on rules to keep us safe," the mayor said into a bank of microphones. "But once in a generation, someone comes along who reminds us that courage, training, and the simple, profound will to save a life can write a better rulebook." Sergeant Maya Reyes did not see a liability. She saw a human being, and for that, the city owes her a debt of gratitude. He then presented her with the city's highest civilian honor, the Medal of Valor. As the cameras flashed and the crowd applauded, Maya's expression remained one of quiet, disciplined calm. She shook the mayor's hand, accepted the medal, and gave a small, polite nod. She wasn't a hero in her own mind. She was a soldier. She had assessed a threat, identified a mission objective, and executed. The commendation was just part of the debrief. Her real reward was standing a few feet away, alive and smiling. A quiet, steady tally in the ledger of a life lived by a code that no civilian law could ever fully comprehend.